Well, welcome everyone to the Feast of Pentecost, the day we celebrate the birthday of the church. That amazing reading from the book of Acts we all got into the game with a few moments ago tells the story of how it all began, how a great movement called church caught fire and began to spread the love of Christ across the globe. This is, of course, a natural day for baptisms, and today we're welcoming 5 new Christians into the worldwide family of Christ in just a few moments. And along the way, you and I will have a chance once more to take our baptismal vows, to remind ourselves once again what it means to be part of this movement called church. My guess is that most people think of going to church as a fairly proper, dignified thing to do. They plant themselves carefully in a pew in a beautiful space like that. Then they sing hymns and say prayers, maybe celebrate Eucharist, all with a sense of order and dignity. After all, at least in our case, it is an Episcopal church that loves order and dignity. But that is certainly not what the birth of the church was about at all. The account we just heard is pretty wild. The city of Jerusalem was packed with hordes of pilgrims from all over the world, from Asia, Libya, Rome, Egypt, including loads of Jews and Arabs all mixed together for the Jewish holiday called the Feast of Weeks. The disciples were gathered together just as they'd been all those weeks since Jesus had been crucified. Their Lord was no longer with them, and they couldn't have been expecting anything new much to happen at all. Stay together and wait, Jesus had told them as his last instructions. Just wait and watch. Then, all of a sudden, in this moment, strange things began to erupt that clearly were hard to describe and clearly hard for Luke, who wrote the Acts of Apostles, to be able to remember and articulate. They described it as a rushing wind and tongues of fire, flames on tops of everybody's heads, all of the disciples. And the disciples found themselves speaking and understanding what was going on in ways they never had before. People from different nations and backgrounds found themselves connecting and understanding, hearing the meaning of what was being said. A crowd quickly gathered around in the street, and not surprisingly, a fair number of them started mocking the disciples. They accused the disciples of being drunk. There they go again, drinking just as they did with their leader Jesus not so long ago. There seems to have been nothing proper and in order at all about the first Pentecost. Just chaos. After all, think about what it's like to be drunk, that word they were using. Of course, most of us would have no idea of what it's like to be drunk, but we maybe have seen somebody drunk at some time in our lives. And what we see is people who are out of control, who are no longer completely reasonable, who say things and do things you would not normally do. Peter set straight the crowd, declaring, "We are not drunk. It's only 10 o'clock in the morning." But in a way, they were drunk with a spirit of oneness and communion, carried away beyond all reason with this sense of connection with each other, that some life was moving through them all, drawing them together, drawing them closer. There was a sense of a kind of ecstatic belonging, it seems, somehow to God, but somehow also to each other, a pervasive unity and connectedness. Then in the midst of the crowd, Peter raised his voice over all the noise and quoted from the old prophet Joel, who had declared that ordinary people, young and old, without any education and little to expect from their futures, are going to, one day soon, dream dreams and see visions of what the world could be. They will not settle for the divisions and despair of the world they know, Joel says. A new world is coming, a new kind of community, a new movement, a new way God is going to heal the world. Peter, in his proclaiming, called everyone who could hear him to come join this new moment, this new movement that's beginning right before their very eyes. And according to Acts, by the end of the day, 3,000 had signed up to be part of it. The disciples themselves didn't immediately sit down, having experienced all this, and lay out a strategic plan for what to do. They needed to take it in. They knew they'd been called to watch and listen and wait to be led by the Spirit. They weren't going to be able to do anything, they knew this, unless the Holy Spirit came to lead them, to give them the power and the vision to do new things. They had to wait for the Spirit to lead them into their future. And so the church was born, not as a calm, quiet place to spend an hour or so on Sunday mornings thinking about things and watching beautiful things happen. And those timid, tearful disciples found themselves being transformed into strong, determined, courageous disciples of Jesus Christ, almost on the spot. No one needs to tell you how much our world needs a movement of healing and communion. It's hard to imagine a time when the world has been both more interconnected and at the same time so fiercely divided. To use an old word from the great philosopher William James, our world is facing an epidemic of torn apartness. Everywhere you look, things seem to be coming apart relationally. We're caught between forces driving us closer together, such as the internet and social media and globalization in all its dimensions, and at the same time equal forces driving us further apart into all sorts of tribalisms of every kind, between religious groups and ethnic groups, between rich and poor, between the races for sure, between political parties, of course, divisions, tribalism, backing away everywhere. Gazing forward into the 21st century, there are great questions facing us. Can we humans learn to deal with our conflicts and differences without resorting to violence and destruction? Can we change the way we relate to our fragile earth before we destroy the nest that bears our life? Can people of faith become agents of healing and reconciliation, which is the only real hope of a peaceful world? In his last prayer before he died, Jesus prayed for his followers, "I ask that they all be made one, so that the world may believe what I have said." For Jesus, the spirit of oneness, of healing and reconciliation among his disciples was the only thing that might make credible this claim that there is a spirit of healing and hope and oneness that can lead the human race through the dark and difficult times it faces. That's how the church began. But what about the church now? Today, this Holy Spirit is at work calling you and me and this church and Christians and people everywhere to reclaim this movement of oneness and healing and reconciliation. So today I'd like to offer 3 simple images or pictures of what it might be like to see the Spirit at work. The first is a part of our Episcopal life, sadly most of us know very little about. It's the Anglican Communion. You may have noticed that we sometimes pray for a bishop or two with an unpronounceable name who's living in a place we haven't heard of. Yet strangely, through the work of the Spirit, we believe we're bound deeply together, one faith, one life, one Spirit in us all. I know many of us think of the Episcopal Church as this small, struggling denomination in North America, but in fact, we're part of a rapidly growing Anglican communion with 80 million members or more. It's the third largest global Christian communion after the Roman Catholics and the Eastern Orthodox. Jesse Zink, a young Episcopal priest, has recently written a fine little book called Backpacking Through the Anglican Communion, in which he explores churches of all sorts in this communion and how that Spirit seems to be at work. He begins by describing the ancient majesty of Canterbury Cathedral in England, which is the symbolic center of the entire Anglican communion. But then he turns directly to a tiny church in South Sudan that consists of log benches arranged under a tree. A 2-decade civil war has emptied out so many of its residents, but thanks to aid coming from the, Anglican communion, farming is beginning again. And then Zink points to a parish in Hyde Park in Chicago that is interracial, progressive, deeply committed to social justice. These three churches could hardly be more different in the people who are there, what they're doing, how they pray. And Zink goes on from there to visit churches large and small in Africa and China and Asia. They, in many ways, disagree seriously with each other on the theologies and issues of the day. They are divided when it comes to the ordination of women or developing new prayer books or the full inclusion of gay and lesbian people in the sacraments of the church. But the spirit of oneness is there, palpably there, seeking to draw people past their divisions into one life, participating with each other. Nearer to home, it's clear how this spirit of oneness has been working here in Boston recently and in Trinity's own life. Many of us are still talking about the very moving rally for GBIO, the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, that happened a couple of weeks ago. More than 1,500 participants jammed themselves into this vast space such that there were only chairs downstairs below. People across the faiths, across the ways that people in Boston make and shape their lives. More than 1,500 participants with Governor Baker and Mayor Walsh here. This place was overflowing with energy and passion as people of faith, so many faiths, were determined to come together to make the city better for especially the most vulnerable, but for all. To address the issues of our time, gun safety and criminal justice and health care and affordable housing, all happening here. That night, here just 2 weeks ago, we were black and white together, Asian and Latino, Jewish and Muslim, as well as Christian. We brought our different beliefs, we spoke in different vocabularies, but the spirit of oneness was working powerfully among us. It was a Pentecost moment. And finally, here within our own parish life, we experienced our own Pentecost moment on a Sunday afternoon just 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, as we came together to pray and seek the Spirit's leading as we chart our future. After months of careful study and discussion about what it is God is calling this community to be about, it was time to listen to each other and to the Spirit. And listen we did, in groups large and small. I heard reports that in some groups the disagreement had been deep, but a spirit of profound respect was pervasive. We closed our afternoon with 30 minutes of silence, during which all 140 or so of us were invited to walk around silently and look at all the newsprint on the walls, everything written, and with dots, put dots on the places where we believed the Spirit was stirring and something was alive. And from that is emerging a full report, charting where we sense this restless spirit of love and oneness wants to lead us. These are urgent times. Do I need to say that? And the Spirit is calling this place and people of faith in general and Christians in particular to a ministry of healing, of compassionate engagement, of committing ourselves to being at one as best we can, even across our differences. And that means we need to be praying for the leading of the Spirit. As a mentor of mine once said, only a fool would pray for the Holy Spirit to come. Who knows what might happen? Still, I can't imagine any prayer better to be praying day by day than this one. Come, Holy Spirit, and kindle in us the fire of your love. Take our minds and think through them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our souls and set them on fire. And now it's time to make some new Christians.